Today on Living History, we are talking with Steffen Schindler.
I got a task from my boss in Germany. He didn't hire me because he wanted to help a colonel from the East German army. His idea was GDR, they had very good relations to the Chinese army. If any soldier of the Chinese army, in this time 3.5 million, would eat 10 grams of meat from us every week, we get very rich. But
today we're speaking with Steffen Schindler. Steffen has a very special biography among the expats in China. He managed an early joint venture slaughterhouse. He founded a well-known German restaurant, Schindler's Tankstelle, and he's been a high-level foreign spy in China. And it all started when Steffen came to Beijing in 1989 as the head of the military intelligence for the East German army. But when the Berlin Wall fell, he found himself out of a job from one day to the next, and that forced the high-ranking soldier from a socialist republic to switch to making a living as a capitalist entrepreneur overnight. His is a life of twists and turns and unexpected developments, and we're very excited to hear him tell us about this a little bit today. Steffen Schindler, welcome.
thanks.
So in my introduction just now, I called you a spy because I read many stories where others called you that. But how do you feel about that? Is that even fair?
It's a complicated question. So I would say unfair is not, but it's from the result, I would say it is to welcome. It's right. It was the right development. But all these things in the history, what had been happened with me, what had been happened with other people too, of course, was more or less put to the self-confidence of these persons and also of their initiative, their own initiative. And therefore, I think everybody forged his own luck. Yeah? So this was, by the way, my former profession. I was blacksmith, so, yeah, and before I joined the army. My way to here was a little bit crowded, I would say, because in our army was this foreign relationship to other armies, means the profession of a military attaché was a career profession. Means you are under certain regulations, you have to serve in this department of military reconnaissance under the special circumstances of the service abroad. We had been not military attachés of the embassies. We had been military attachés at the embassies. This was a difference because this is independent office, independent regulations. I was not subordinated to the ambassador. I became officer in 1970, and in 1972 I joined the Ministry of National Defense, of military reconnaissance. So in 1975 I went for a practica to Yugoslavia in this time. Yugoslavia was for East Germany a thing between Western and Eastern countries. Yeah? Very independent. Josip Broz Tito was still alive. Yeah? Everything in Yugoslavia was in a good shape in this time, or more or less in a good shape. And after this, I had joined the military academy, means the University of the Army, and I finished this with the diploma in 1981. So, and then I had to go immediately, I should go immediately to Greece, but you know, Greece was NATO country, and regarding to the agreement of the government that they have to agree, Greek government was waiting. We are waiting and waiting and waiting, and therefore my ministry decided to send me to Ethiopia. in the time between that I'm not sitting only around. Yeah. And then I went to Ethiopia. It was very interesting in this time for me, because this was the time of Mengistu Haile Mariam, with his liberation movements in Tigray, in Eritrea. So after 1.5 years, I went directly to Egypt. In Egypt was a very special task for me, because my military attaché was Colonel Dr. Arnold, was a very nice guy, but he was not the man who was going outside to get detailed information or something. He was a little bit weak in contact, and this was my task, to organize the information about, especially of course the Americans in Egypt, because they are violated in many cases the law, the Egyptian law. The Americans, I have to say, they transported aircraft carriers through the Suez Canal, what was forbidden, nuclear-powered ships, and they have done it. Enterprise went several times through the Suez Channel. And of course, it was a time of Yasser Arafat in the PLO, and with a lot of contrary problems in the PLO. And so therefore, my old minister, Hoffman, he gave me the task not to deal with the PLO, with Arafat. I should deal with a counter-PLO in the PLO. And this was a very interesting task. Who was in the PLO against Arafat? Yeah. And what they have done, it is mean not only who is arguing against Arafat, what kind of ideas they had to, was also to kill Arafat. Yeah? So many times they made attempts to and assassinate him. And this was a very successful work, I would say. And I met also 4 times Arafat in this case, in Egypt. And he was also a very interesting person. And I have to say this made my time there. And I went back in '86. So then was a regulation after certain years, latest after 5 years, you have to stay in East Germany, in the GDR to serve in the army. This regulation tried to prevent that you becoming a colonel for cocktail parties. And I had to serve in the troops. And I was chief of staff of the 1st Mechanized Division. And then I was prepared to go back to Egypt as military attaché. And I took my preparation time and have done everything. And then you have this step in this preparation time that you have to go to the Minister of National Defense or to the Chief of General Staff. And the minister was not in office, so I had to go to the Chief of General Staff. This was General Strelitz. And this, I will never forget, my wife certainly not, also not. I came there and I asked, or I made the order. He was in a very big office, and he was sitting at the end, and he was signing some documents, and the glasses on the nose, and he said, "Sit down, Colonel," and I was sitting there 2 meters in distance of him, and then he asked me, by working further, what you like to do in your free time, and reading or music and blah, blah, blah. And then he said, "What do you like to eat?" I said, "Oh, I love Italian, Indian food." I said, "Also Chinese." And then he told me that you can have every day now. And I was not thinking at this moment about this. It took a little bit longer, and then I said, why every day now? And then I asked him, I said, comrade was in this time, yeah? Comrade General. What do you mean? I go to Egypt, I said. He said, no, you will go to China. And I said, they told me I go to Egypt. And then he said, I am the chief of general staff or who? So I said, of course you. And I came back to my department, and my general asked what had been happened. I said, okay, I will not go to Egypt, I go to China. He said, you cannot, and our whole program is killed. And I said, okay, take the telephone, call him. So, of course he didn't. No, and this was the reason that I went to China. My son was 1 year old, and we are flying with the old 152-4.
154.
Yeah, 154, yeah. This was for a range of 4,000 kilometers, means we went down 3 times, yeah. And
you mean you landed, you didn't crash?
Yeah, then we didn't crash, no. We landed 3 times in Russia, of course, and it was a very long flight. And then I started my work, but of course this had nothing to do with reconnaissance in China. Means not against the Chinese. This was a task, and of course everything had to prevent what means to bring us in a bad situation. Militaries are every time a unit. If you have a uniform, a rank, you are part of a society, a special society. And as long as you are performing normal and not in a certain way to be strange or something like this, then you are member of a club. I would say really of a club, yeah. And this you can feel with all parts. In this time we had been NATO and Warsaw Treaty, so it doesn't matter from where you are coming from. And I remember when I came to China 1 week after my being here, I got from the General of the United States, military attaché, Colonel Light, very famous in the first Iraq War. He was the chief reconnaissance of General Schwartz. He was here as a military attaché, and he said I should come to his office. We should have a talk. and I went to his office, and he said, okay, we do it in this normal way. I can give you, and you can give me. And what we give to each other, we decide by ourselves, but we cooperate. I said, there's no doubt we can. And we had a quite good cooperation, but of course, not so intensive. Americans are a little bit special. Yeah. But we had a club. This was a monthly newcomers luncheon club. So this had been 10 military attachés, what came 89 to China, Canada, India, Japan, Thailand, Australia, British, Slovakia, and me. And this was a very close group. So of course, and then, these events in our home country are rolling on. Yeah. So I was at this time at home in November. I have seen in TV this remarkable statement of Mr. Schabowski in TV when he was very helpless and looking for papers on his desk. And then he found one and he said, oh, I think it's up to now.
Also Privatreisen nach dem Ausland können ohne Vorliegen von Voraussetzungen, Reiseanlässe und Verwandtschaftsverhältnisse beantragt werden. Die Genehmigungen werden kurzfristig erteilt. Das tritt nach meiner Kenntnis, ist das sofort, unverzüglich.
And they had been helpless because they didn't know anything. Yeah? And remarkable is, I think, that they have done the right thing. That they opened this one and no shooting and nothing. Yeah. So this was also before. What I know is, of course, our department was a little bit the center point of all informations what are going in and have transferred to the ministry, yeah, for whatever information this would be. And I know that from Leipzig, there was from some people in the political committee was the intention to go by force against the demonstrators. And therefore, a lot of independent fighting battalions had been transferred to Halle, to the barracks of the mechanized regiments. So I know it's a parachuters, for example, one battalion, and they had been ready to fight in Leipzig, yeah, to go against demonstrators with weapons was the idea. And in this current chief of National Security Council, this was Krenz in this time, he decided from his position, stop, nobody will leave the barracks. We don't take military power against the demonstrators. And I think this was great. However, the time was running. We got a new minister, Mr. Ebbelmann. Yeah, he had the name in the army Bruderreiner, yeah, because he was from the church, yeah, and we said it's like a monk. Yeah, and he said in May '90, he said the National People's Army will be the Bundeswehr East. Yeah. So, and therefore he was convinced about this, that we will be part of the Bundeswehr, the Western Army. So, yeah, and everybody said this is stupid. And a very close friend of mine, he was the commander of the Frogmen before, in the Frogmen company. We are sitting every time together. He said, he's stupid, he had no idea. They will kick us out. So I came back to Beijing and with the order to get a new apartment for a new assistant. I had already two people, and I had an assistant, and then a lieutenant colonel, and one master sergeant. And I should get a captain additional. Yeah. So, and our ambassador made at this time, end of May, already the decision who will leave Beijing from the diplomats. Yeah? One by one, by names, he said, you will leave then, and then he made a list. And then he said, by end of this round, he said, more questions? I said, yes, I need an apartment for a new guy. He said, how it can be? We send everybody back home and you will get a new one. I said, yes, we will be East part of the Bundeswehr. He said, who is believing this? I said, I don't know who is believing this, but I not. I said, so we kept the feet a little bit quiet. So, of course, on 17th of September, I was presumed to leave China. So, and before my people, but I said, this monthly newcomers luncheon group, they asked me in a meeting, what you will do if you go back home to Germany. I said, I had no idea. I learned the profession of a blacksmith. I cannot earn, how we say, the salt in the soup, you know? with this profession. This is no chance anymore. I have no idea. Yeah. And then they start to think. Yeah. And the British guy came and said, my brother-in-law has in South Africa supermarkets. You can take one supermarket. I said, South Africa supermarket. I was considering I have to put salt or sugar in the shelves. Yes. But it was an idea. It was first an idea, yeah. And my Indian friend, he said, I will go back, I will promote it to general in Jaipur, and I buy for you handicraft things, leather and wood, and you open a store in Berlin and sell this. Was the idea, yeah. So, and then my Algerian colleague came. He called me in the night, 4 o'clock. I remember this. And he said, Mustafa was his name, Karacha. He said, Nadia, his wife, was waking up me, and she said she has an idea. A German company, this is Mr. Fleisch, he is looking for assistant. And if you would like to do this, we can talk to him. I said, yeah, this sounds not bad. German company in China is good. And he said, yes, I was assuming this. I called this guy already, and we have an appointment 9 o'clock. So, and we went together 9 o'clock to a Mr. Hecht. He came from Flensburg, yeah. And so he was this Mr. Fleisch, because this company was Huan Fleisch GmbH. Means, yeah, Huan was China Anus, the shortage, and Fleisch Meat, yeah, Meat Corporation Limited. And this guy, he was believing it was his name, Mr. Fleisch, but his name was Hecht, like a fish. And he was not so happy with me, because this bloody communist he doesn't like so much. Yeah, but he was very correctly, he was a counter type, yeah, with pencil and razor and such things, and calculator, pocket calculator, and
very German.
Yeah, very German, really very German. And he said, of course, I will transfer your papers to my company, and we will see. So, yeah, and this was done. Then I get the permission to be released from the army. You could also go to such a waiting line, yeah, for 3 months, but they told me, no, don't do it. Go, get out, then you are free and you can act. Yeah. So, and you can imagine how wives, yeah, or act. My wife said, okay, you are already 3 days unemployed. You should do something. So, and call them, and so. And I called Niebel Anus Enterprise in Germany, and I said, look, I'm this guy, and my papers should be there. And I was talking to Mr. Anus by himself, and he said, yes, I got it, and I'm very interested. Coming Saturday to me in Niebel and 10 o'clock. So I had to look in the map, where is Niebel? Yeah, I didn't know. So, and then I said, my goodness, it's 500 kilometers from Berlin. I told my wife we go to Flensburg, stay overnight, and early in the morning we go to Niebel, not to come too late. And this was the 7th of October, East German National Day, Saturday, 10 o'clock, I was in Niebel. And then he was talking to me, and he said, I would like to take you. And I would like to send you back to China, but you have to learn the profession of a slaughter guy. So I was surprised, yeah, sure, but I have not shown him yet. So. And he said, how long do you think you need for? I said, 3 months I need. He said, you say, or learning normally 2 years. I said, look, I know percentage calculation. I can already do it, yeah. And then I know what is fibrils, egg white, so, and a lot of other things. And so, he said, but you have to make examination of the what this industry and Handel industrial and handicraft chamber, whatever we call it. I don't know, IHK.
Yeah. It's like, I think it's kind of like Chamber of Commerce or something like that.
Yeah, but it is on a low level. Yeah,
Yeah.
And so, but they make these examinations, yeah, normally, and after 3 months, I have done it. I passed it, and I was used for all branches. Yeah. Buying cattle, slaughter pigs, slaughter sheep, cattle I didn't slaughter in this time, and everything what you can do, the technical part and yeah, and then I went back to China. We had not to packing out our container, yeah, was sent back straight away, and then I came here to Dachang. This is 54 kilometers outside of Beijing, in this time really Hebei province, and was a very small village, but this Muslimic autonomous county. And we had, in the slaughterhouse, we had to proceed regarding Islamic regulations. Yeah. Only
Halal.
cattle, yeah. Halal, yeah, halal. Slaughtering. And I had been the only foreigner in this small village of 1.1 million people. Yeah, with my family, of course. But my family was in this time not there. I went alone first because it was winter time, and in this time, winter was really tough in China. We had minus 20 or something like this, and I had in my room, in this company's hotel, we called it, I had 3 ribs of a heat. It was snow everywhere inside also. So, and I started to work, and I got a task from my boss in Germany. Therefore, I think he didn't hire me because he wanted to have a colonel from the East German Army. This was, or to help a colonel from the East German Army. His idea was East Germany, GDR, they had very good relations to the Chinese and very good relations to the Chinese army. And if any soldier of the Chinese army, in this time 3.5 million soldiers, would eat 10 grams of meat from us every week, we get very rich. But I think the background was a little bit different. We had, from my boss, Mr. Hecht, we had 250 tons of roast beef in the freezer, in the deep freezer, without fat. Because in '90 was the Asian Games in China, and he, by order or beer talk of a guy, he said, all the sportsmen, they want to have roast beef, but without fat. And they don't eat fat. And then they cut it from the roast beef, 250 tons, the fat away. My Chinese, they came to the idea, we pick the fat back with toothpicks on the top. Yeah, so I said it's not possible. But to sell this roast beef without fat is only a customer who is taking big quantity. And therefore he said I should offer it to the army. And my advantage was that when I left China, the chief of general staff of the Chinese army he told me, if you are one day in China back and you have a problem or so, then call us. But I think he meant when I'm coming as a tourist and I can get no hotel room or something like this. So, and therefore I called his adjutant, he was speaking very good German, a captain, and I said, Captain Deng, I have a problem. I have to sell 250 tons roast beef to the army, and you should help me. So, and he said, I have to talk to the boss. And then he informed me that coming Monday will come 8 people, and they will have a look. They had a look. The boss of this group, a general, he decided then that the first preserving company of Qingwandao has to take the 250 tons. The general manager of Qingwandao was sliding under the table because he said, I don't have money. He said, we are not talking about money. The money will come from another source. And they picked up the 250 tons, every week 50 tons, and they paid every time in the second week. The second was paid for the first. So, and my boss said, we will see never money. Yeah. And this was not by contract, this was a typical Chinese handshaking contract. And he didn't understand in his former 4 years that the handshaking contract has a higher value than any written one. Yeah. So, therefore, it was working really perfectly. And after this deal, I could announce in Germany, roast beef is sold after 4 weeks. And my boss said, I want to quit my job. I am 4 years here and it's long enough and blah, blah, blah. I think he wants to get more money or he would get this confirmation of his reputation or something like this from the board. And we had board meetings then in end of March. Just sold this roast beef. And then he said he would like to go back home. Yeah. And was waiting in the circle around or looking around what they would say. And Mr. Anno said, okay, Mr. Hecht, you can come and you can take over Flensburg slaughterhouse. He was a little bit surprised that this was going so fast. And then he asked me if I would take over the slaughterhouse. I took it, of course, I said yes. And I was running this till 95 for 5 years contract. And in 92, we opened, I got an Austrian butcher master, and for our own, he started to make some sausages privately in his kitchen. Yeah? And of course, in the Muslim county, we couldn't operate with pigs. Yeah? And then I convinced the governor that we can add to our slaughterhouse, separated, we call it with the Islamic wall, a cutting department for pigs. Means not slaughtering, only cutting. And he gave the permission for, and then we cut a pig. This was a precondition to make sausages. And then I convinced Annas to send us some equipment for producing sausages, smokehouse and such things, cutter, bull cutter and such things, grinder. Yeah. So, and we started to make sausages on a lower level, and we established in Beijing the first butcher shop, what they had outside of hotels. Yeah? We had 3 in hotels, Kempinski, Lido, and Palace, and we made here in Sanlitun our first butcher shop. My Chinese colleagues are running this one, and after half a year they had been bankruptcy.
Why?
So it was this typical problem, yeah. They took from the freezer, from the cooling store in the shop, they took every time this what had been in front, and they never changed. And when I said we make a really inventory, we took about meat out in the value of 50, 60,000 renminbi, what was completely gone, yeah, smelling awfully and because every time from the front, yeah, and what this was behind was laying there. So, and my deputy, Chinese, he that the joint venture, I have to say, was a little bit difficult, was 50-50. Yeah, that is not a very good position. Yeah, for each side. Yeah, and my deputy said, okay, we gave it up. The Chinese, the Germans should do it. Yeah, and then my wife took it over, this shop, with, of course, with Chinese colleagues. Yeah, and then it was running marvelous, I would say. Since was in this time is also that we helped to establish Jenny Lu, yeah, this supermarket group. Yeah, Jenny Lu was in this time a vegetable stand behind the yard show, and Jenny Lu was the only one who had washed vegetable, yeah, and really accurately presented. And I had rashes of this Italian one from the, I think, from the last emperor. I don't know if this is the correct name. They are a little bit, yeah. But he made before the last emperor, and he had from the World Wildlife Fund the task to make a movie, a longer movie about panda bears in Sichuan. And he came to my company and with a long list and his cook, what he needs for this 6 weeks or 2 months in the wilderness in Sichuan. Products, beer and French cream and sauerkraut and rolls and meat, of course, and vegetable fruits and such things. So this was the reason that I went to Jenny Lu's stand and I asked her if she can prepare like 200 kilo of oranges and vegetable and such things. This was, I remember this was a value of 110,000 renminbi what she should get. And of course she was happy. This was not for 2 years what she could earn there.
Yeah, it was really a lot of amount of money.
Yes, it was. In this time was a hell of money. Yeah. And look, my workers in this time, they got 280 renminbi, yeah, 4 months. So, and this was working fantastic. Everything was okay. And Jenny Lu opened then by side of our shop a vegetable store with this money. Yeah, was great. This was the beginning, yeah, that she came in operation. Yeah. And then I was creating with the other people the McDonald's in this comedy. In '92 we started with, you know, this regulations of McDonald's is that they decide to go to a country, they inform their suppliers, yeah, Keystone, Simplot, and or Keystone is our second part of OSI Chicago. This is also meat supplier, the patty supplier for all patties. And the other one is McKeystone. And you have Simplot and Parma apple pie. And this is OSI. Simplot is potato producer, yeah. And Parma is bakery, so for the buns. And this had been all in one group. And OSI was the head of this group, and then we discussed, we as the only meat supplier, we had been checked from the United States Army, Veterinarian Corps, they have, and had been allowed to supply McDonald's. And my German people are very keen to make money, yeah, of course, and therefore we created a joint venture with OSI Chicago. This was HUSI, so-called, means from Huan and OSI, the short. But the joint venture was never working, yeah. Never established really, but they registered the name and they produced under HUSI. And they want to have a production hall and in our area of the slaughterhouse. And therefore we had to remove in our backyard, in a backyard area, really big, a storehouse with a platform. This was 600 square meter, but about 30 centimeter concrete, yeah. And we had to remove this. And we got, of course, my Chinese organized, and then came a working group of 20 people with hammer and picker, and a forger, blacksmith was also there. He made this, so, and they pickered, I think, two days or so, and they had perhaps 5 millimeter, everybody. And it seems that they need 2 years or something like this for this. Yeah. And I said, it will be not, and I called again my nice Captain Deng, and I said, I need some explosives here for pioneers, engineer troops or however you call it. And he was at the telephone a little bit silent the first moment. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, I have such a platform. And so then, of course, I got the answer, okay, we will send somebody to have a look. So, and then several days later, 2 guys came really in suit with tie. And I said, oh, no soldiers. And so he said, no, we have some soldiers, but first have a look. And I said, do we need to cover the windows from the slaughterhouse? He said, no, there's no need. And then the generator corps came and they drilled holes in this. And I said, yes, I had, of course, from the army, I have this explosive permissions. So I said, okay, 70 gram in electric wires, and very easy. So, and nothing. And he said, do you have a spoon? I said, yes, I have a spoon, of course. Then he opened his trunk from his car and took a shoebox out, which was like concrete in, and with a spoon he filled some powder in these holes. And then he said, we need some water. And then he put some water on this platform. And he said, now we go for lunch, and then we sleep 2 hours, and then in the late afternoon we will have a look. Oh, very strange. So, and we have done so. And then we came back, and the concrete was that you can push with the edge of the shoes, you can do it. It was like an old cake, And and this was SCH, soundless cracking agent. They constructed all the rings with this powder. This was created in East Germany, in Berlin, at the beginning, but then nobody or somebody found it is not so big use of it, and they stopped to develop, and they sold it to China, and they further developed it and used it. So this was very impressive. Explosives. And then 95 was in preparation. We had a discussion with Israeli company. This was UDI, Mr. Eisenberg, and Mr. Anus tried to convince Mr. Eisenberg to be partner of Huan, because Eisenberg had the intention to bring Burger King to China. Of course, and he wants to get us also as a meat supplier, and therefore Anus tried to make him as a partner. And he wants to sell shares to Mr. Eisenberg. I will go now to details, but the shares had been a little bit expensive, to say so. And we left this talking, and several days later, the general manager of Mr. Eisenberg called me, and he was speaking very good German, and he said, Mr. Schindler, Mr. Eisenberg wants to talk to you. And I went to China World, so it was the office of him, and I was sitting there, and he said, do you think that the shares are really calculated for Mr. Anus? What I should pay for 20% or something like this? And I said, I cannot answer this question because it seems a little bit high, I said. So, and he said, okay, we have not to talk. And then after this talk, 2 days later, I got a telephone call from Mr. Khan, the CF Khan, was the general manager. He said, Mr. Eisenberg would like to get you for a job, because I had no job. After this, my contract was finished in Wuhan, yeah, and I was looking what I can do. I got from the Austrians a task, but I didn't take it in this time. And and I went to Eisenberg, and he said he would like to give me 2 companies, a holding with 15 joint ventures, oil production, means edible oil, and also the company who's supplying the equipment for this edible oil. He said, really, my Israeli guys, they are cheating me. So, and Mr. Eisenberg was from Munich, yeah, was speaking German, very good, was able to speak Japanese, but no Hebrew. He was speaking Yiddish, yeah, and English, of course. And he was, at this time, I think, 74 years old. Yeah, and he was, he was running this company in a way like, I am the king. Yeah, so, yeah. And he was on the Forbes list in the position 27. I think 14 billion or something like this. Was quite good. And then he was dealing with me like all these Israeli or companies are doing normally, that you are in a position regarding to your military rank, more or less, yeah. And we had a general. This was then we had an Air Force pilot from Netherlands. He was older than me, also colonel. And then the third one, I was in this whole office in the third position. And I had then this department with around 20 people. And I was flying every week to my joint ventures here in China. It was Akesu, and from the north to the south, Yunnan bis to Xinjiang, and Harbin, and I was only flying, and but I had a really good time with Eisenberg. We both had a very good cooperation in understanding. In '92, I'm sitting in my office. It was close to the 3rd Ring Road in the Wuhan, and I got the telephone call, and here is Oberst Colonel General Staff Eberhard Möschel. Do you remember me? No. I said, yeah. And he was the military attaché of the Bundeswehr in Egypt. We had been together there. And and he said, I'm now on board, yeah, and we should meet and and of course we met. We became, I would not say really friends, but all traditional. So. And perhaps half a year later, he said, now another guy who is coming to China too, and I will introduce him to you. And we had a meeting. In this time, the new embassy was not ready. It was the old one, and the former East German embassy was used from the West German. Yeah, and we had a nice garden and so on. And we had a big party there. And he came with another guy, and what I know after this, he told him, Dr. Becker, I will show you today a guy who you know him. He is producing the liver sausage in China. And he said, Dr. Becker said, I don't know anybody who is producing liver sausage here. And he said, yes, this guy you know. So, and Dr. Becker was the chief of the BND office in Cairo before. And he became the chief of the BND office in Beijing. And then, of course, we have seen, we have known each other also, you know. So, and by the way, then with Dr. Becker, I went 15 times for private sports treatment, spa treatment to the Boden Lake. So we had been really good friends. Unfortunately, he died 3 years ago. Yeah. But this is, I mean, to say for the connection, international connection in the community and so on, was not so tough as people believe. Yeah, I mean, the cooperation is still today. Yeah, next week I have the German military attaché office here in the restaurant, and it's every time it's continued. If you are retired or whatever, it doesn't matter. With Eisenberg it was going, but he died, unfortunately, here in Beijing in 1997, and I was his son took over, but they had inner family disputes from the sisters. They want to have a lot of money, and he doesn't want, or he couldn't. Yeah, and he said he will quit, and therefore he gave up. But Eisenberg had a position in China you cannot imagine. Yeah, he was here in business since 1974 or 5, and I remember only one thing, that we had a dispute with the Chinese government regarding smuggling of crude oil. Means eatable crude oil, yeah, second-grade oil, not refined. In this time had been smuggled into China about 3.5 million ton. And he said, you are coming from the army, you should make a nice map where this is smuggled and which companies are refine this oil and what are the ways and so on. And we go to the Chinese government, to the prime minister, and we will explain to him, Eisenberg said. And then we went to Li Lanqing, was in this time the vice prime minister and responsible for customs security and such things. And we are sitting in this big, in Dayutai, in this big hall, yeah. And he said, roll your map out, this was a huge map, yeah, and explain what is there. I explained. Mr. Eisenberg was sitting in front with Li Lanqing, the translator, interpreter behind them, yeah, and Mr. Eisenberg started to speak in English, and then he didn't make any break anymore, and he was talking and talking and talking, and Li Lanqing was also sitting there and listen, and then I made every time to him, to Mr. Eisenberg, he should make a break, and then he asked me, what in German, what you are doing with your hands the whole time? I said, Mr. Eisenberg, have a stop. The interpreter cannot follow you. Yeah, and you have seen, say, what is interpreter? Yeah, first they are writing like hell. Then they made only some phrases. Then only one important words. Then they close the book and listen only. Yeah, so it was out of line. Yeah. So, and I was surprised, and Li Lanqing said, no, it's just no problem, in English. Huh? I understood everything, and to the guys on the left side, his ministers, I will explain later, he said. So I said, okay, this is exactly this, how misunderstood Chinese in advance, that you believe they cannot understand, yeah. But his English was super, yeah. And this was such an event where you can see that Eisenberg, yeah, and Li Lanqing said to him, we are very old friends and I can understand you and I will try to do my best. But he said, look, we have also to consider how many working places are hanging on this smuggling. He said, it sounds strange, but he said, we cannot kill everything because there are big problems. Yeah, okay. This was only one thing I met in many cases. I was taken from Eisenberg to nearly to every event what we had from UDI. This was the company UDI, United Development Incorporated, and I was sitting there. Sometimes I was believing, my God, yeah. I remember we went to Harbin the first time, a new joint venture, and they told me in the board meeting, I was a vice president of board. Yeah, they told me in the board meeting, Mr. Eisenberg is owing us $8 million. I said, it's good. So, and I had another guy from Israel. He was 82 years old. Josef Masor was a Romanian guy, but very intelligent man, spoke 7 languages. Yeah, and he was with me together, and he said, we should check it. We checked the books, yeah, and we came out of this idea that it's right. The Chinese had been right. So, and I called Mr. Eisenberg in the evening, and I told him, look, the Chinese are getting $8 million from you. We're owing them. And Eisenberg asked me, and this is true? I said, yes, we checked and it's true. He said, and why you are calling me? He asked me. I said, because this is your money, not my money. He said, look, he called me Junge. Yeah? Junge, he said, till we make this agreement, till 10 million, you decide by yourself. So I said, never. Never. I said, when I make a mistake, what is then? He said, then you have a big problem, he told me. So I said, look, I will ask every time. He said, okay, but you are not disturbing me with such simple questions. And I went back home and I said, yeah, I was a little bit confused. So, and then I established these shops, this new, and the government came and said, you cannot, as a foreigner, you cannot have a shop. You can sell in the shop only what you produce by yourself. I don't know what was illogical, but it was. And I said, okay, then I make a production. Fortunately, from the time of Mr. Eisenberg, I was, in the financial terms, able to do it. So I established a production in Beijing, Kaifaju, and we produced sausages, and we cut meat, and then we sold to 25 hotels in Beijing and 17 cities in China by air freight. Viking River Cruises, yeah, was the Swiss company, was one of our biggest customers. And the problem was that we reached the level very fast of a medium-sized company, but the management was still a one-man show, as me. Yeah. And of course, I had a financial director, but it was very complicated to do it. And what was very difficult for us is that the terms of payment from the hotels, some of them had 120 days terms of payment. They got our products, but the meat supplier to us, they brought the meat and want to have the money. So, means the cash flow was in a very bad shape. One day I was living in Beijing, Kaifaju, in Xiaoyangfang. And I was here in Kempinski. I had invited some Chinese friends and also some German friends. And we had a dinner in Paulaner, Kempinski. This was an awful dinner, I have to say. This was nothing. I remember only that the waiter was asking us how we want to have our escalope, medium or rare. So, pork escalope, yeah. So, and schnitzel, yeah, is so medium or rare is a little bit strange. The waiter didn't know that, but so I was upset. I paid a fortune for this evening, and then I went by car back home, and on the highway, I was thinking, my God, this we could do much better. Yeah, and there was born the idea of a restaurant. Yeah, and I asked an old German friend, He was before general manager of a hotel here in Radisson, Heinz Schumann. I said, if you have an idea somewhere, and he came, Ritan Park, this shop from a Shanghai artist. He made porcelain and for tea and something like this. And he wanted to move out. And therefore we took it over. Of course, I didn't say anybody that I will establish a pub, a restaurant, a German one. And also not my wife, that she didn't know. And but this was short for before 2003, 2002, we started to renovate it. 2003, I was inside making the decoration, and I stand outside in front of the door and was smoking a cigarette in this time. And friends of mine passed by. And they asked me, what you are doing here? Yeah, of course. So, and of course I couldn't say I'm standing here only. And I said, this will be our restaurant. And stupid-wise, this wife met my wife 2 days later. So and said, we had a look to your restaurant and it looks really good. Of course. So I had some bad days at home. So, and my wife told me, I have nothing to do with this restaurant. It is yours, and so finish. And then we made what you can do only in China and Germany. They had killed you. I asked the workers inside to remove for a Sylvester New Year's party all the equipment, this dust to clean it, and we want to have a party there inside, in this half-finished, decorated restaurant, yeah. And they have done it, yeah. So they said, okay, we will do. Yeah. And we had a fantastic party. And from this day, it was also the restaurant of my wife, fortunately. So it was working. But then we want to open it, and SARS came. Yeah, we got really, at the opening day, we got the announcement, lockdown. And from the government, this lady came and said, you have to close it. I said, okay, but then we need a paper, because I was every time writing that we open, and now I need the official paper with shop, what I can put to the door that we had to close. And next day she came back and she said, no, we decided you should open the restaurant because we need a little bit something alive around. So, and we kept it open. Of course, it was lousy. And this time, and then when it's getting a little bit more easy, I catch by myself sauce from a German guy. He came from Germany to China, and I was not going to this special hospital, yeah, the isolation hospital. So I had been at home, and I was treated at home from our German doctor. And then we opened this, and it was going quite good. And then I was, of course, for this one, I was working very long time to get it, but it was not possible. This was in Chinese hands, and then it was a French restaurant, and they changed every time. First it was a Swiss one, Swiss chalet, and then got a French restaurant, and in 2005 I got this one. So, and this was the development all together, and of course we are still I had still some contact to my military colleagues, also especially to the German embassy, yeah, with all of them in also what they changed. Yeah. I have now, this is the military attaché number 7, what I met, and so, but still also in Germany, I have to some of them still, I'm still in contact. And this is quite good. And 2019, we decided that I was 72. It was enough. we go back home, to Germany back. This was, I think, a normal decision at them because I couldn't stay here with visa problems.
Why?
Now, I was independent. Means I had an independent business. I could get a working visa, yeah. But I missed it. This was my own fault. I didn't bought property before. I have the property of our shop. This we bought, but I didn't bought an own apartment or something like this. So the prices what we faced, yeah, it was growing up. Yeah, we started with 16,000 and suddenly to 16,000 renminbi, and we ended up in 2019 with 28. Yeah, and this was to finance all this one. And if I tell you that we pay here, or I paid here, 230,000 renminbi a month for rent, yeah, and if you take 230,000 renminbi a month, you can imagine how much beer has to run through the tap. Yeah, so it's this is a permanent flow. Yeah, so you normally you cannot. Yeah, and you can only handle this one in connection with also to balance it. One of our biggest advantage was that my wife then, when she have not anymore done the shop, she made the catering of our company, and we made really big one. We catered, for example, for Volkswagen, 2,800 people in the Olympic Village. So, and really big one, and a lot of embassies.
Tell me about Volkswagen.
Volkswagen was for Family Day. They made Volkswagen, they were sitting around the corner, not anymore, but before. And we made for them quite a lot. Also Christmas lunch and for all the employees and such things. And catering was a very important part of our business too. And therefore we couldn't bear it. Yeah? But so what I had heard now, the owner of this building is now in preparation to take next year, after April, the contract will run out in April. He wants to have 350,000 here a month. So, and the new owner is my former finance director lady. She said she cannot. She cannot. She is paying now 280,000, means 50,000 more already than me. Yeah, and that is unbelievable. Yeah, and so nobody is checking it. Yeah, and means from the government there's no regulations. You can do what you want, and of course he will try to get it. Yeah, and I'm coming here regularly 2 times a year, and I check the taste of the sauerkraut and the mashed potatoes. Yeah, so, and I complain or not. Like this time, I have not to complain. It was very good quality. Before it was not so, but now it's good.
What makes a joint venture, a corporation between foreign partners and Chinese partners, work? Yeah. And when does it have problems?
Yeah, this is a good question. Yeah, so, I mean, you transfer technology and knowledge from the foreign side at the beginning. I'm speaking now about this time when I was working in a joint venture. If you want to transfer technology and ideas to improve, you should have majority. Yeah, because if you have minority, you can say it, but you're depending this if they understand, if they already do bear this risk and to accept it, and we have a lot of things, but you can say, okay, it's not my one. So you should be the minority, should be really minority, not 48 or something like this. Then you should have 20% or something like this. Then it doesn't matter. Yeah. So, but if you have a higher part of minority, say close to 50, makes not so much sense. Then you are every time very angry if you cannot not proceed. Yeah. And in a balanced one is not good. If you are sitting there and you are every time in such a pot situation that no side can proceed. This is not so nice. But you should try to convince them. And you have to accept. My predecessor in the slaughterhouse, he was very angry. He said, they make Monday twice a month, they have a party meeting. And they do it half hour in the working time, before knock-off half hour they used. So I said, what is the problem? I said, this is their regulation and you have to follow up. No, and he made a lot of trouble with them, and you have to really to accept certain things. What you losing face, this actual in this time was nowadays I don't know if still the same problem, but in this time was beginning of the 90s was losing face was a big problem. I had a guy in Wuhan, he said, he wants to take a time out, he feels not very well, and so, but he wants to hear only from me that I said, no, you cannot. You cannot, we need you very urgent in the company. Yeah, and I pay you also a little bit more if you stay. And I said, no, it's okay, I can understand if you feel not well. Then make a medical check-up, stay at home for 3 months or something like this. It is no problem. And he was really upset about this. But I was believing I favor him. And it's not.
Wait, how did you overcome that? How did you solve that?
No, you cannot solve it. If you have that, stay at home. You have to insist on this one. I said, his friend told me. Yeah, the general manager. This was a deputy general manager of this company, and the general manager told me he didn't insist this. Yeah, he said I should say, yeah, you cannot, and so on. I said, why you didn't tell me in advance that such an idea could come? And he said, I cannot because I was not sure that he will say. But then we found the idea that he was staying at home like for 1 week, and then the general manager called him and said, they said, you should come back because the work should be done and we are missing your position here. As you can repair it, but you cannot repair it by yourself. You should find somebody who is doing this. Yeah. I made at the beginning a lot of mistakes. I found that my Chinese people didn't use the balance not very correctly. Yeah, so I want to formulate it very carefully. And we had a tremendous amount what was nowhere. Yeah, and I said, where it is? And my main bookkeeper in the company told me, it's the cost of the daily food was increasing. And I said, what should be the cost of the daily food? We are a slaughterhouse. Our food is also cheap because we can use this meat what is coming from the cutting section, what is normally gone away. Yeah? We can use it for cooking. Yeah? Oh, no. This is so. And then I made a roughly calculation. I said, it means now that any worker from our company is eating per day for around 600 renminbi. So in this time, yeah, you could eat in Kempinski for this amount. Yeah. So was. So, and I spoke with my German boss about this before board meeting, and he told me, we should be careful and we should not talk about this. And so I said, what should I do as the general manager of a company? I know it, and I accept it or what? But yes, it will be not less in the future, it will be more and more. Yeah. And we had then, it was exactly, because we didn't say anything, and the next year was nearly double. Yeah. And then I had a guy, now I know the name, Röhl was the name, he was in ZDF, this board, and he was part of our board too. He was a really nice guy, an old man, but a really nice guy, and very clever. And he said, no, normally we cannot, we should find a way to explain to them that we know it at first, means that we know this misbalance, and that we don't accept it. Yeah. And they should correct it in a certain way. Don't make big noise, but yeah. So, and this we have done, of course. And this was also the reason that I didn't want to prolong my contract with them. Of course, we had been very successful. I know I took over with 60,000 FEC. This had been in this time this foreign exchange certificate. Yeah. This is foreigner money. Yeah. This was in the balance the profit, 62,000 I think. And then we didn't calculate anymore in FEC, yeah, because it had been renminbi. So when in 95 I handed over was with 120 million renminbi profit. Yeah. And this was for the slaughterhouse, for the size, not bad, but we had a hell of business. Yeah.
Was it difficult to do international business in the time of FEC before China joined GATT or WTO?
Yeah, sure you couldn't. Yeah, you cannot say you couldn't. We made some business with, for example, with the United Arab Emirates. Yeah, the ambassador organized it. We sold lamb to them. Of course, they paid in US dollars. It was possible. We had been a joint venture. It was no problem. Yeah, and we made to other countries some export. And what we have also done is, this was also new, you produce a fifth quarter. It sounds a little bit strange, but in a slaughterhouse you have a fifth quarter. These are all these products like head, skin, the hooves. Yeah. So, and the skin was, I think, not really used. And we got a German guy. He was working in Indonesia for Mercedes-Benz for the leather seats. Yeah, and he said he would like to buy from us all the cattle skins. And we start to sort them, to dry them, and to send container to Indonesia with the cattle skin. Yeah, we slaughtered 35,000 cattle per year, and this was a quite good business, a permanently one. Yeah, and you get quite good money, but you have to take care that that is actually also a problem. Yeah, that this caretaking. Yeah, that they do permanently this what they should do. Yeah. I had in this time not a friend, but a guy, a Swedish guy. He established the first yogurt company in Beijing. And he said his biggest problem is every time the cleaning of the pipes, because you have to create every time this reactors, this
bacteria.
Yeah, something like this. But he said they kill it if the pipe is not cleaned. Yeah, all these improvers are gone. Yeah, and there was this. He said this before weekend. He said I have to stand there and to look every week that they clean it properly. Yeah, and this was for our companies the same. Yeah, you have to stand behind them to say do it properly, and then we don't face big problems.
You've been mentioning money quite a little bit. How have you been doing in all these years? How are you doing today?
Yeah, I think it was from the jump from form before that I got money from the government. Yeah, this was good for East German regulations. I was very good paid. Yeah, sure. So I started with an amount where I said, "Wow, yeah, it's great." But funny-wise, I had to pay my rent here, to school, and therefore nearly my whole money was gone. But what I got at the beginning. And then of course I got a little bit more, and here a little bit more. But end of '95, when I quit this first meat joint venture, and I came to Eisenberg, this looks very different. So I have to say, this was the reason that I could establish a meat production, a shop. Yeah. So, and then finally also a restaurant. Yeah. So I got tremendous paid. My wife said every time, unfortunately, Mr. Eisenberg died 3 years too early. Otherwise, I could go perhaps already after this in pension. So, but I don't want to miss this time also after this, because this was, it was sometimes difficult. Yeah, this up and down, and you know, this Chinese law is sometimes not very easy. Yeah, and I had here in this restaurant a guy, he was cheating and stealing, and we had by video the proof that he was stealing. Yeah, and he was stealing a bottle of whiskey for 1,200 RMB the bottle. Put it, wrapped this with newspaper, and gave it follow up by a video outside to his friend, and he put it in the trunk of the car, and I fired him. Yeah, and he went to the labor office, and I paid the punishment for incorrect firing this guy. I should go first to police to make a trial for him, yeah. So, and then I can fire him. So I said, look, I don't want to bring him to police for a bottle of whiskey. I fired him because I don't want to see him anymore. Yeah. No, I paid 52,000 RMB punishment. Yeah, so you say afterwards, my God, what I have done wrong, yeah. So this is sometimes was not so easy. Yeah. Also with this shop, yeah. So they came and said this was then a temporary action from the government. We should put everywhere glass in front of the counters, yeah, and then to have these small doors in, that the people can talk what they want. And I said, never, yeah, I will do never. Yeah. And they said, yes, you have to, and because it is regarding to bacteria. And I said, that is strange. Nobody in the world has it, but here, yeah. And you can see it in some old markets. They have this. Everybody is behind such a glass wall, and they have so small window in. Yeah. But normally you have, of course, you have to accept it. Yeah. But that is the regulation. You are foreigner, and you should remember that you are foreigner, and you cannot make the rules here. Yeah. And this is traffic and all these things. Yeah, you have to follow up.
How do you feel today about your time in China? What's the conclusion?
How difficult?
No, how do you feel today about your China?
This was a great time in my life, definitely. So I met fantastic people. In really, I have to say, 99%. Now I would say, perhaps before I would say perhaps 80%, but now I can say 99% had been nice people. Say, for myself, if I would be not here, yeah, what should be then? Yeah, for sure. They gave me the chance to develop myself here. Yeah, this was not only the German side. This was also the Chinese side. And I'm very grateful that I got this opportunity for this long time to stay here. And to stay here without big problems. Also to have the opportunity to talk still to people and to get some ideas, some advice. And I like it, and I honor in a very high level what they have reached in this 30 years. Yeah. And when I came, it was nearly nothing. No cars on the street, yeah, nothing. Yeah. So only bicycles, yeah. And then you can make your own experience that you are going by bicycle. In this time, I tried. Yeah. I tried because I want to save the gasoline and I want to move a little bit by myself. And I was going in Beijing by bicycle with such a bulk of bicyclists. And then I want to go to the right side, and it was not possible. I had to follow up for 2 crosses more. Yeah. So, and then this experience you can get nowhere. Yeah. I enjoyed the street food. Yeah. In the morning, you have a soup, a noodle soup on the street, and you have this oil-baked things. So, and for 5 renminbi or 2 renminbi, I don't remember. Yeah.
Okay, this is my last question. I really have to ask you about this. We have talked to people who were saying food used to be better in China in the old days, and we say now other people say now food is safer, now it's better. What's your opinion?
No, I think so. Of course, the food is much better than in this time. Yeah, from the hygienic point already. Yeah, and when you went in this time at beginning of the 90s to the meat market, and you have seen how many flies are on the meat, yeah, and what he is doing with such a tail of a horse or something like this to remove them, yeah. The products are much safer now. Yeah. The water is much better. Yeah, what is coming out of the pipe, and I think so. The air is much better than in this time. Yeah, than because we had days you didn't know exactly it's still night or not. Yeah, so it was awful sometimes, and now it's much better. And of course, also the people changed a lot. I can see it. Yeah? Also, when they are coming, they are much more focused. They are much more open. Also, I have the impression the period is over, that you have this dark one showing up. Yeah, that a guy who makes to show the other people to burn 100 renminbi with the lighter. Yeah. So, this is, I think it's more or less over, fortunately. Yeah. So, and I think this development will go on. Yeah. And we have this disadvantage that we are running behind from Germany. That I can't understand that we have not the chance to be realistic and to say what is useful for us in Germany, what is also useful for the other, and therefore we should cooperate. Of course, or not follow up all ideas, but mainly we can find us somewhere, yeah, for a common idea. Yeah.